A bipartisan consensus reached this week in the Illinois General Assembly. Not on a budget, though. That's coming up next on Capitol View. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle reached a consensus this week when the General Assembly was back in session, but it was not on a budget. We're at way past 100 days and counting, and still no spending agreement. I'm Amanda Vinicky, and thanks for joining us this week on Capitol View, joined by some esteemed colleagues for what may be the first ever all-lady panel of Capitol View. So a fun one that I get to host here, joined first of all by Jordan Abudayyeh of WICS Channel 20, and also Hannah Meisel. She's with Illinois Public Media. We're colleagues in public media there. I should say that my day job, or night job, all the time job really, is as State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio and WUIS. So let's get to what they didn't do first. And even though that isn't necessarily news, because as I mentioned, we are nearing the end of October. That's the fourth month that Illinois has gone without a budget. We're supposed to begin a new fiscal year, of course, in July, and we are seeing the consequences, the fallout of this kind of slow motion shutdown, it's been described as. The General Assembly came back to the state capitol, both the House and Senate. Senate hadn't been around since, I think, September 9th, and it was late September for the Illinois House. A lot of expectation going into that. Jordan, what did we see, however, happen at the state capitol?
We did not see really much of anything. It was quite a boring day for us. And we saw, a little bit of movement in the House side and a committee, a spending bill going forward. House Democrats are still without their supermajorities, so really what else can they do? There's not a whole lot that they can move without that one vote that they're missing because of Representative Golar's death. Her appointment was announced recently after they met for session, so I think now we're looking, the Senate was in for half an hour, so we're now looking forward to the next date, November 10th, right now as it's scheduled. Maybe then we can get some movement on something, maybe a vote on health or child care or possible spending bill, something to that effect.
Well, so a couple things that I want to make sure and point out. As Jordan said, Representative Esther Golar passed away, and that had been really significant because she came to session and there was a Democratic legislator who instead stayed in New York for a legislative conference. That meant that the last time that Democrats had that full 71 in the House that they need in order to get a measure passed right now, they didn't have it. Her replacement has been picked, but I'm interested to see what exactly Representative Ken Duncan, that one who'd been missing, and there's been some word that maybe he's now moved over, changed allegiances in cases to Governor Bruce Rauner's side. So I think it'll be interesting when they come back in November. Esther Golar will be there. Anybody that wants to comment on that? Am I crazy for being intrigued, or will he break ranks?
Well, he's been criticized not just on that particular vote that you're talking about. The House had tried to override the governor's veto on a union arbitration bill, and he wasn't there. But he's also been seen with the governor on several occasions. In fact, also at Esther Golar's funeral, they were sitting together. And they've criticized him of, maybe taking some money. Rauner has $20 million in his campaign fund that he has promised to use on legislators who will support his turnaround agenda and to use against legislators who stand opposed to it. And he didn't like any criticism that he was Mike Madigan's puppet. And to prove that he's not, he might go out of his way to be Rauner ally for some things, maybe not everything, but it's possible.
Right, so November 10th, we're expected to perhaps see this child care vote that fell when he wasn't there. There's been a lot of pressure on some of the more moderate Republicans, and now we do have a lot of Republicans, both sides of the aisle actually, having some rank and file legislators retire. But one of the measures that you brought up, Jordan, that did get through a committee is one that would take away that would spend money, basically pay it out, money that's being held now because of the budget impasse, but it's not from the general revenue fund, kind of the state's basic checking account. This would be money that you have tacked onto your cell phone bill to pay for 911 call centers, or money that is supposed to automatically go to municipalities so they can pay for road projects, things such as that. That could be a key vote. It advanced, but is that why we didn't see anything happen with it this week, because of the one missing member, or what?
Don't forget the Illinois State Lottery. Everyone is very upset about not getting their lottery winnings.
You're right. I've never won, so
I didn't know there were so many people that were winning the lottery, but apparently they're very upset. So yeah, I mean, these are all special funds that the money's already there for. So a lot of lawmakers are feeling the heat in their districts back at home, and they're saying, hey, let's pass a bill. Let's spend this money. It's not going to add to the deficit that we're facing. This is money that was already earmarked. The Democrats will probably need that one vote. I mean, I think, Representative Golar's, that really speaks to how weak perhaps the supermajority is in the House. People always talk about Speaker Madigan's power, but he herds cats, and sometimes those cats don't always listen to him. So when you have one vote that can really make or break something, I think this will be it. We've seen Republicans, many of these spending bills, vote no on them, pretty much for all of them except for the federal pass-through spending. And they say no because if you put it on a 12-month scale, it spends more money than we actually have. It'll be interesting to see if that is their same pitch for this bill. It was in the Senate, so it'll be interesting to see if that's the same take, or if these weeks in between the vote have really put pressure on them to vote the other way.
Pressure on them, but then there's also pressure. The governor met with legislators, the House caucus, and said, things are going as planned. We got this, and it seems to be a pressure game, truly. And it's been described as a hostage situation, crisis, negotiations, and the more pressure there is on Democrats to come to the rescue, the more maybe they'll give in to Rauner's union and economic demands, and then vice versa, that maybe Rauner will drop those when he ends up taking the heat. Can either of you speak to, we've seen some polls that show people aren't happy with Rauner, or really anybody, right?
Right. We've seen some recent polls that show Rauner's numbers, approval numbers, are actually lower than his predecessor, Governor Quinn. And people didn't love Governor Quinn.
We saw how that turned out.
Yes. The governor's people, of course, say that, polls are one thing, and they pointed out that previous polls done by these institutions have shown what they call a Democratic bias. I'm not qualified to speak on that.
All right.
But which is interesting also because when they do their own poll numbers, they tout them. But, that's how it goes.
In fact, I got a press release from the Illinois Policy Institute, a conservative think tank, that said, look at how great the governor's numbers are in comparison to Democrats, even though by and large it shows that people are unsatisfied with state government.
Right. Because the governor is going to be the most visible, figure in state government. You vote for your local lawmakers, but the only person that the whole state votes for are these statewide leaders, and at the top is the governor. And it's interesting that these polls came out around the same time as we had two former Republican governors criticize the job that Rauner is doing, and they both said we need a budget. Former Governor Jim Edgar was more pointed. He said he called for Governor Rauner to stop holding the budget hostage for what the governor wants. This turnaround agenda, which includes union weakening provisions and pro-business measures, and we've seen almost no movement on those. And the governor this morning, actually, he was asked about both of those comments. The second being from former Governor Jim Thompson, a very long-serving Republican. And the governor basically rebuffed them. He said, that's one person's opinion. Neither of those governors were around.
I thought it was kind of a veiled critique. He said, I don't spend my time criticizing other people or talking about the mess that we're in now because of past decisions. Guys, the decisions you made that got Illinois' budget so bad.
Right.
Look, I've said from the beginning, I think I've said it on this program, this entire budget impasse is going to be a war of public opinion. We saw the governor, when he made those comments in response to the former governors criticizing him, he made them at a diner in Springfield in the morning, walked in, ate a few bites of breakfast, shook some hands. It looked very much like a campaign stop. This is a war of public opinion. So right now, I think, as much as the governor says he's not paying attention to polls, I think him and his team are. And I think the Democrats are looking at the polls as well, because the first person that breaks is going to be the person that realizes they have the most to lose in this situation.
Looking at polls, and yet where the governor is different than Illinois' previous administrators and governors, is that he's a wealthy guy. We saw he put out his most recent tax returns last year. Nearly $58 million was his take-home pay. That's, of course, after he put nearly half that into the governor's race in order to get this new job. So he, I'm sure, is watching polls, but he is not as concerned as other politicians with needing to make happy what he terms special interest groups. It seems as if he has his own special interests, but it's not necessarily the same ones. So anyway, I wanted to point that out there. Getting back, however, to these governors Edgar and Thompson, do you think that their comments will do anything to change that tide of public opinion? Are they popular enough, respected enough figures that that's going to make a difference? Or taking it outside of public opinion, get back into the Capitol, is that cover it all for Republican legislators who, again, have had to perhaps take some tough votes to stay within Rauner's good graces, but that maybe aren't good in their particular districts? Is that going to change anything?
We have not seen all that much break in the ranks. Very shortly after these comments from both governors Thompson and Edgar came out, we had Ron Sandak, a Republican from Downers Grove, basically the de facto mouthpiece of Republicans on the House floor, very well liked, very well spoken, take to Twitter, and he said,
always on Twitter.
Always on Twitter. Both of them, it's just one man's opinion, and both of them served at a time when the state was not in this mess that we were in. And, at least I can speak to his point about Edgar. Edgar served 1991 to 1998, I believe. Very prosperous time for not just Illinois, but the whole country. So I don't know that we're going to see any breaks in the ranks quite yet. We've seen, surely behind closed doors, Republicans are, more moderate Republicans, especially those who have union backing, they're having a hard time. I know of a few, but they are still not willing to stick their neck out, maybe for fear of this $20 million that Rauner has said he would use against people that don't support his plans and then use for people who would. So, maybe sticking some new faces to run against these people. We're still maybe a month away from the filing deadline. We could see some movement there. And so I think people are, I think people are too afraid right now to speak up.
We have, during this gridlock, heard from all corners, really, of the state. Autism centers that said they've had to close. We're in October, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and there are shelters. In fact, Comptroller Leslie Munger, another individual who is allied with the governor, saying some statements that were taken as perhaps she's beginning to turn against him after she said she doesn't think fighting with unions is the appropriate way to go. Scaled back on that critique a little bit, but nonetheless was made. Anyway, another groups that we saw, universities and students afraid of MAP grants. This all comes as the state has seen not one, but two different credit ratings agencies, Fitch and Moody's, both downgrade the state. Jordan, why do we care about credit ratings? Why is this a big deal in the first place, and particularly for a business-minded governor under his watch?
Yeah, I think if you're going to say, here, I'm going to come in and my whole entire goal is going to be to make the state attractive to business, this climate of uncertainty, which Moody has credited in their report, says you guys need a structured budget. You need a budget in order to keep the faith in your bond buyers. This doesn't matter maybe to the everyday person here in Illinois, but to the investors who are buying the state's bonds, it matters. And now it makes the state's borrowing costs go up, which the state's already in enough of a financial dire straits, so we don't need to add any additional costs to that. But I think we look at a governor who says, I really want to make business work here, and this uncertainty, which former Governor Edgar, made mention of in his critique, is not conducive to business, despite not having reforms. So it's almost like you took the state back a few steps. Now, when I talked to some of the party leaders around August, that was day 70 or so of the budget, Senate President Cullerton actually sat down with me and said, well, maybe when we start getting downgraded, this will be the governor's language. This will be the tipping point where we need to get something done. Now, we saw Fitch downgrade happen, and there really wasn't a whole lot of movement, and there really wasn't a whole lot of discussion about it. So now that we see Moody's happen as well, it'll be interesting to see if that forces anyone to move in any sort of direction toward a balanced budget. But the governor's people have already come out and said this Moody's report is just another example that we need structural reforms, and the Democrats need to stop blocking them, and we need to get a budget done once we get those reforms. So it doesn't seem like anyone is usually actually looking at this and seeing this as a warning for the state, which is what they need to be doing.
And it really is a warning from these credit rated agencies. They said, quote from Fitch, once again, the state has displayed an unwillingness to address numerous fiscal challenges, which are now again increasing in magnitude as a result. And from Moody's here, we have the downgrades reflect weakening of the state's financial position during 2015 and our expectation that an ongoing budget stalemate will lead to further deterioration. So, oops, eek, and all of that. Hannah, as I mentioned, higher education is one of the areas that hasn't been funded since July. You are based out of Champaign, obviously where the University of Illinois is, Urbana-Champaign is. What's going on with universities? Are we going to see them close their doors, or is that all faux reckoning?
So actually, it's funny you should ask. I was at a Senate hearing about higher education earlier this month, one of 4 in, I think, a week. So marathon hearings there. And it was held at Eastern Illinois University down in Charleston, and the president of EIU had expressed that maybe EIU might have to close sometime midway through next semester in the spring. If there was no budget certainty, they had already drawn down some of their reserves. They had already had a lot of financial difficulty. They had to lay off over 150 employees. They were thinking about more ways to mitigate the cost to students because they don't want to raise tuition more to price out some of these students. Anyway, he had warned that maybe that they had to close midway through next semester. He did walk those comments back later, but the fact that
that'd be huge. I mean, that'd be national news, more so than the lottery. Midway through, students are turned away.
And but the fact that he got there at all and said it in public in a hearing, he was testifying. Other public universities, community colleges, actually. The community colleges do a lot more than meets the eye to the average person. There are some downstate that provide education to prisoners who are about to get out. It's not just, book what you might think.
There's a lot of vocational training.
There's a lot of vocational training, which means that once they get out, they will be trained for a job and they can jump right back into the workforce and add to the economy.
Something that Rauner says he wants.
Exactly. And so more than one community college that provides that kind of education is worrying that they're going to have to back away from that commitment. There's adult education, which provides basic education for people who didn't finish high school. In some cases, they have very limited reading and writing skills, which of course are basic, what you have to be in the workforce. And then of course we have thousands of students who are sitting on pins and needles, basically wondering if their MAP grant is going to be there in the spring or next year. MAP grant is the monetary assistance program that provides tuition dollars for needy students, and some colleges, like the University of Illinois, they have a lot of reserves, and they have in the past been able to cover some of these students when they get an IOU from the state. But others, like Eastern, who again have already had a lot of financial difficulty in the last 5 years, they're not going to be able to cover that many students, and that's why they're left wondering what is going to happen.
And university presidents did make their case to legislative leaders as well as to Governor Bruce Rauner. They had group meetings filtering in and out of the Capitol, said that they got no guarantees from the governor, but he did reiterate his commitment to higher education. I know that I've had people scoff at some of the comments, for example, when Governor Rauner says, I love this. I didn't want to do this. I care very much about, for example, the Illinois State Museum. Jordan, there was some news about the Illinois State Museum this week, another casualty of the fiscal situation. Can you explain?
Kind of a bizarre casualty, too. They are on probation for their accreditation, something that we all knew probably was going to happen once its doors were shut down. You can't be an accredited museum if you can't actually be a museum. Yeah. So we knew this was going to happen, but all of those people who work at the museum who are union employees are still showing up to work. They do have a facility where they do research, and the scientists are still showing up to work, and they're getting paid because their layoff notices were sent out, and now it ended up in the courts. So I don't know how much money the state's actually saving right now having it be closed. And so it's one of those bizarre things that has really made people angry. It's a free museum. It's been open for 100 years. People are angry about it, and you're not
especially in Central Illinois.
Right, and you're not saving the money. You're not saving anything. And it seems like these steps that the governor has taken to, as his team calls it, manage the budget crisis, are just interesting steps. I mean, the
not a ton of money.
Right, like the State Museum is a drop in the bucket compared to the deficit that the state faces. Even the child care program, the changes to the child care program are not that much compared to how the problems that the state faces. So I think a lot of people are looking at this and saying the governor is picking winners and losers in this situation. And the losers that he's picking are interesting and catch a lot of attention.
Furthermore, some of these losers that have become the casualties of his administration shutting down are things that could spiral into a lot more money being spent in the future. For example, childcare. So if you can't afford childcare anymore because the Rauner administration has used their emergency rules to say you don't qualify anymore because you earn
too much. You above. Right. You're above you're making the minimum wage, and that's too much money.
Yeah, which is not very much, of course. Then what do? You maybe drop your kid off to someone that you sort of know for a reduced rate, or you're going to have to quit your job, which means that you're going to end up on public assistance, meaning the state picks up more of the tab. Or, if someone has to drop out of college because they don't have their MAP grant, then they're not higher education is supposed to be the great equalizer, is it not? And so they're not going to have the opportunity to jump into the workforce at a level that they wanted to and contribute more back to the economy.
And yet there are those who say, Governor, keep on going, fight the fight. We haven't seen change. We don't like where the state was. That's why we elected you. I heard it myself today when the governor visited Charlie Parker's, encouraging folks to vote for the local Springfield horseshoe, but with an English muffin this time, so you can vote online for that. The governor said it was delicious, but he only took a couple of bites. I was hungry. It was early in the morning. I was ready to put my fork in. Moving to other museum news, Jordan, we had, since the last taping of this program, changes at the helm of the Presidential Library in Springfield. Was that expected? Did Eileen McVick have to go? Can you talk about that?
I think the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum as a system, it is under the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, has 3 separate boards that all conflict with each other. That structure, that power structure, hasn't been working for a long time. Eileen McVick being part of that structure for years now. Other people who are in the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, Madigan and Rauner, kind of agreed that, hey, let's break this off and make the ALPLM its own state agency. It is Springfield's gem and really the state's gem. It attracts a lot of visitors, brings in a lot of economic opportunity for the Springfield area and for the state. I just think there was a lot of infighting. And so I think, taking Makovich out of it, maybe that'll help, because the plan to separate the ALPLM from the IHPA never actually happened. So maybe that helps. You know, we're getting rumors, confirmed sources have said that, you know,
more changes on the way
are coming. So, you know, if the governor wants to switch up the entire state agency, he's free to do that. It's under his control. But, you know, I don't know how much that's going to impact the problems, because if you just put more people in and they're still fighting with each other, I think you really have to change the power structure there first.
Speaking of a power changeover, and we really have a brief bit of time left, but didn't want to tease something at the beginning and then we made you wait the whole show. That's our trick to help you watch. It's bipartisan agreement. Hannah, where did that come from?
We have a new Auditor General beginning in January. Longtime Democratic Representative Frank Montino of Spring Valley is going to be replacing a longtime Auditor General Bill Holland. He was approved unanimously in the Senate, and only a handful of
we had dissenting
Republicans in the House, and which is, I think, a lot of people think is good. They're excited. Frank is a very well-respected representative, and I think people are also glad that Republicans did not turn this into a partisan issue, because that could have been very damaging. Bill Holland, we can remind everyone, was formerly a top chief of staff for the Senate.
For Democratic,
yes.
So they've seen this partisan position before, and that's where you had Senate Republican leader Christine Radonio speak on Montino's behalf. As Hannah mentioned, however, there were 10 Republicans, many of them newer, who voted against Montino. Would like to briefly add here that during this budget impasse, if you thought it was just social service agencies and universities, no. Also, of course, state fair vendors weren't paid. And we saw a story this week that, quote, the butter sculptor is waiting for her moolah. You can find out more about that on our Facebook page. That's Capitol View Politics. I'm Amanda Vinicky with Illinois Public Radio and WUIS. Thanks a ton to my lovely lady guests, Hannah Meisel of Illinois Public Media and also Jordan Abudayyeh of WICS-TV in Springfield. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.